What are Serenity Games? Games that helps your mental health. Games that calm you down. So, hello everyone, my name is Monden. I'm a published researcher when it comes to behavior science, like how people react when they play video games, how they react, what happens with them emotionally, mentally, and so on, right? In this video, we focus on serenity calming games then. Games that have pottering, games that focus on low tension game. In the previous video, I focused on games that have incredibly high tension, and those games gives you calmness not away, right? That's why I like to try to differ here between tranquility and serenity. One is from your inside, one is from your outside. Explain it more in the video later. But anyway, this video then will have three main topics, right? First, explaining the mental difference, right? Okay. Secondly, explaining how the mind works, why these games are good to play and so on, right? And in the end of the video, I will give some examples. Of course, our whole video, I will cover different Serene games, right? But still, I will try to explain, like, here's my like top 10 or whatever, right? I was thinking about that last video, like, why didn't I actually rank my top 10 videos for this thing, right? Kind of dumb. I even mentioned, like, games are good for children to play in the last video. That also could be maybe a video in the future, right? I'd like to make a video in the future about games that children should play, and obviously that would definitely like a top list, right? But anyway, let's first go into then some examples of serene games, and then also what I call tranquility games, right? The opposite of this. So obviously, first of all, we saw Stardew Valley, right? One of my favorite games of all time. Excessively amazing game, new patch ever, right? Greatest game ever made with one person, amazing. That game is probably, today I feel, the most known example of then what I call serenity games, right? Or usually called pottering, right? And actually my mentor, he's done a lot of books about pottering. So it's like his expertise. So this topic I know very well from academia. Having went to school, in grad school, having discussed it many times. But other games that gives you serenity, or this kind of calmness, right, are games like Civilization is probably the most, I would say, classic version of this thing, right? It's a strategy game. It has more tension, so it's not completely like Stardew Valley, but it has one more turn. Civ is very famous, right, for the one more turn concept. And my mentor, he published his paper when they discussed about what he calls flow of calmness, or like calm flow, whatever you phrase it. And that I think is a really good way to explain these games, the strategy games, because you get so into them, you submerge yourself into the game. And Civ, of course, if you play it, you know, and you get into, one more turn, one more bridge, gonna be one more thing, this thing, one more barrier, this thing, you get into that feeling, right, one more turn, right? Stardew Valley, same thing there, plant this thing, one more sprinkler, this thing, right? So they're very similar from a cognitive standpoint. And again, I think Civilization is the first game, more or less, I would say, ever, to really have that, like, one more turn flow established, right? And I'll say more later also why Civ is a good example. Another great example then, rollercoaster tycoon are the good example, right? And this is probably, I feel, a better example than Civ in altogether, because there is some tension in the tycoon games, like, I'm losing my customers and the money and so on, right? And it's different, like, we have Airbus, and you have, of course, rollercoaster then, you have Zoo Tycoon, Hospital Tycoon, so on, right? There's the kind of money stuff there, but you can always play them usually, right? Most of these games, tycoon games, have like a turn-off mode where you just play with like infinite money, whatever, right? And you can just build stuff, right? Where, of course, in the Civ and similar game like European Universalis and Stellar, so on, right? Those games you have enemies, right? There's no real enemies in the tycoon games, arguably the customers, but there's no real enemies, right? So they're even more like low tension. You're building stuff, you're nurturing stuff, you're evolving your park, right? And of course also then games like Farming Simulator, right? Similar games like this, obviously also kind of like calming, kind of tranquil, right? And I think it is also one of the reasons why people really love to play these games, versus actually being a farmer, because there's no actual tension, no pressure, right? It's just kind of calming job thing, but if you fail, you're not gonna lose your farm, right? So it's quite much more calming effect. Now the opposite would be games like StarCraft. That's happening all the time. We have the minimap and this thing and the radar and things that are exploding, and it's just so much stuff happening, right? This was mentioned in my previous video, and that's why in the comment section there, I'm thinking about it a lot because people are asking me, right, oh, but I don't get calm at all from playing StarCraft. I get calm from playing, Stardew Valley or whatever, right, or playing The Sims and so on. So I was like, well, it's two different calmness, right? In my previous video, as I mentioned then, and links below for that course, you're getting tranquility by playing games like StarCraft because it's so hectic, it's so much pressure, it's so much tension. So what you achieve, right, in games like StarCraft and also games like Street Fighter is that you're so incredibly focused on the game that you, of course, you forget everything else, right? I keep calling it, I said, tranquility, calmness, but also another word is trance, right? You're getting the trance state because you're so focused on only thinking about the actual game that you forget your troubles, right? You forget your issues at work, your issue with your wife, or your husband, or whatever, your boyfriend. Everything is forgotten, right? Because you're so focused on the game, right? So that's how you get calm and refresh your mind, because you're so incredibly focused on the actual experience of playing the hardcore game. So usually that, of course, is a multiplayer game. But it also might be like a single-player hardcore game with like permanent and so on, like a Souls-like game, Elder Rings, right? Hardcore games, right, might give you a flow of state, right, when you're playing them. But again, very, very different from the game that I mentioned, right? But I want to go over here again. This is a short list of like tranquility and serenity games. Anyway, let's now explain then how does this serenity from mindset works, right, from a psychologically and scientific standpoint. Let's be a bit more scientific and not just covering some examples then, of course. But first of all then, there are this thing called 8 different fun factors of like video game design or whatever. And the last one is what the author called Mark LeBlanc, almost the same name as Matt LeBlanc from Friends, right? But this guy's a scientist instead. They have very similar names, it's almost the same last name then. His work focused on these different game factors. One of my papers that I wrote focused on a 9th one, I'd argue for, which I call the cool factor. And I think they actually, maybe I'm right, maybe he's right, but I do feel that there's a little bit lacking in the fun factors, honestly, because he didn't think too much. I mean, obviously it's kind of old, right? He didn't think about games as today, when you have like Twitch and YouTube and so on, right? Where you can experience games from both watching you play the game and also from being the actual streamer, right? So he didn't think about that stuff, basically, just how science works, basically. Behavior science, cognition science, right? New stuff happens, new culture happens. So a little bit of that. But anyway, in this fun factors then, the most obvious one, of course, is the challenge fun factor, okay? Game being hard, right? And as I mentioned earlier, but tranquil games, StarCraft, Dark Souls, whatever, right? These games are obviously challenge fun factor. Now, of course, a game can have more than one factor. So, for example, a game like Dark Souls or Elden Ring then would have challenge fun factor, obviously, okay, it's hard, right? But also, of course, discovery fun factor. Those are clearly the two main factors for like Elden Ring, undeniably, right? Hard boss fights and, a world to discover, right? Open world game, obviously, right? But then the last fun factor is called submission fun factor. And that's kind of where these games fits in, right? Games like Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing, etc. Coming in course later with more examples, but you get my point. This is what this game comes in, right? The slower, methodical games, you're building up your farm or you're building a country, right? Like a civilization, you're building your country, so. These are called submission gameplay. However, as I mentioned earlier, though, right? Obviously, Civ is a little bit both, right? Because Civ has enemies, you're fighting stuff. You're also, for that matter, discovering stuff in Civ. You're kind of going around in the world and finding that. So, Civ is interesting, and also one reason why it's a popular game, right? Because it has challenge, it has discovery, submission. You got a little bit of everything, right? But I still think that the big reason Civ is a big fan is because it was the first real good submission gameplay. It was the first real game where you could sit there for hours, just like tinkering on your village, right? Tinkering on your city, tinkering on your country, tinkering your empire, yeah. It's the first game that really achieved that, again, that one more turn, right? And today, we have many examples, right, of, again, then this, like, one more turn feel to it. But I think, like, that was the first one, and the difference, though, like I said earlier, again, is like tycoon, but let's see, right? The tycoon doesn't have the attention, and usually we talk about submission fun factor then, I'll come to later as well, is that you don't have much tension and low pressure, right? But anyway, other ways to look at submission as a fun factor, it's also kind of like game as a pastime. It's quite what it used to be called literature. And it's a little weird feeling, right? Well, isn't every game a pastime? But the way you reason and the way the old professors reason with the papers, right, with the books about this, is that when you're playing a game like Elden Ring, you're playing it, sure, it's pastime, you could be doing your homework, so you're playing like Elden Ring, but you're still playing some kind of challenge, you're trying to beat the hard dragon, right? But when you're playing a game like, again, say Stardew Valley, right? You're just kind of trying to just, get the better village and farm and so on. You're not really trying to achieve anything. So that's kind of where this pastime come in. It's kind of like you put on the game, you just kind of keep playing it. And if you move to another video game then, famous example, World of Warcraft, and sorry if I'm going to keep using these big names, but I think when I make the videos, I tend to try to use these like very known games, right? I am a super niche nerd, so I know every goddamn game ever, but I think it's easier if I keep using these like big video games, right? The bestseller ones. What do you guys think? But so far I keep the bigger ones. So World of Warcraft, great example of actually submission gameplay, first and foremost, right? Because grinding, to some extent, is submission gameplay. World of Warcraft, I would argue for, is the first real MMORPG where you could, so many people just play the game used to farm, right? And sure, people didn't have every quest and so on, but I think really World of Warcraft had millions of people that didn't even try to, do the dungeons. They didn't try to do music grading. They just kind of run around with the pets, and especially hunters in the beginning of the game. Many hunters just run around and wanted to capture all the pets, right? That's a very submission gameplay. I mean, to some extent it's discovery, finding the pets, and it's so much challenging, but it's mostly just like, okay, I keep doing this thing as a side note, right? And I think that one way to look at submission games, and this I think is very true for a game like Stardew Valley, is that when it comes to Stardew Valley, it's a very submission gameplay, because you can turn that game on for like 5 minutes, right? And do like 1 or 2 days in the game, especially early game, like 1 day, like a minute, and then you close the game, you can go and, do whatever, go to you, whatever. Or you can turn on the game and play for like 5 hours, right? Without breaks. Usually that happens to me. I turn on the game, I'm gonna play it for the whole day, right? But it's very easy, I think, for most of these like submission games, is that you can turn it on and turn them off, right? Immediately. You know what I mean? And if you don't turn them on, you can play them forever if you never turn it off, right? Where again like Elden Ring, you play Elden Ring for 5 minutes, you basically haven't even left your camp, right? You're like putting on the sword, going up here, is it enemy? You know what I mean? Maybe if you say that the boss, right? But you get a point. It's like those games, it's kind of like you play it, and usually you play a whole dungeon, you know what I mean? You find a new dungeon in Elden Ring, you go into the dungeon, you find all the enemies, find the treasure, you get to the boss, you die 100 times, and you beat the boss, right? That's kind of the experience of Elden Ring, and then you might turn off the game, maybe not. But usually you play the game in a session, right? I think the same thing in like Final Fantasy or whatever, typical role-playing games. You kind of play the whole dungeon. Where again then, like I said, Stardew Valley is like, you can play the 5 minutes or 5 hours, there's no real break in between. And I think again, there's a bit of World of Warcraft, right? Like I said, World of Warcraft is probably the first MMORPG to succeed having different ways, right? Because in that game, likewise, you can play the mythic raiding or whatever, and do the dungeon raiding 3 hours, and then have a very dungeon raid between 20 to 23, right? Those 3 hours, I will dungeon raid, bam, 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 right? Or I can just turn on the game, do some pet trading, find some new hunter thing, maybe farm a little bit of some skin, right? And then turn off the game, right? It's very easy to both play World of Warcraft for like 10 hours, just farming all the time, right? Grinding and so on, getting new stuff. Or play it for 5 minutes, you turn off, do some dailies, turn it off, right? So I think that's what they really achieved that game, because it became that, daily thing, right? Which of course is very common today then in the MMORPGs, that you have like, your daily login and so on, right? And it is unfortunate because it is fun to do that, I think, but I think is that it was better back in the days where dailies in those MMORPGs weren't forced upon you. It was more like, it was very easy to log in, right? Before school, play for 10 minutes, you just do your dailies, but they called dailies. You had dailies, but it wasn't as like determined with dailies, right? You kind of did them, you went to Fellwood, took some pets, took some little herbs up there, cut off the game, went to school, But now it's kind of like forced to do dailies. So it's really, I think it's terrible how it become like mandatory in the game. But it used to be kind of like a natural behavior people had, right? Which was much more enjoyable. But anyway, I hope you get what you mean now. With submission gameplay, it's very important to understand this term. I think generally, from a behavior standpoint to understand these games, right? These games like these pottery games, Animal Crossing, whatever, you have to understand how they are different, usually I think. And naturally, these submissive games, right? Naturally, are they very popular on, mobile games, on the Facebook and so on, right? And I think it is this genre, so to speak, right, has of course exploded for the last, I guess, 10 to 15 years or whatever. And then of course the mobile phone, right, and also generally social media, right? Because these games were, they existed of course to PC and a little bit to console, mostly to PC. But now then, these games are very popular, right? Especially among women, right? So they're very common to be played on mobile phone. As I used to explain, right? A submission gameplay usually means you can play the game for 5 minutes or 5 hours, right? Which is perfect, of course, for mobile phoning, because you can play you can play your game, right, on the commute, right, to work for 5 minutes and then put it away, right, So it's much better. The genre is much more fitting for playing during your lunch break or going to the office or whatever, rather than again than a challenging game where you should have like an hour, 2 hours of session, right? Can't really play that on like your commute. For example, I used to commute playing Fire Emblem Engage. That was released. I love the game. I love Fire Emblem, but kind of hard actually to commute with because it's turn-based, so it kind of works. You can still play it for 10 minutes and put it away, right? Because it's turn-based. But the thing is that one stage of Fire Emblem can take like a few hours. You play on maddening mode. I want to play on maddening, so it's like, oh yeah, you play like 5% of the stage, right? You put the switch away and you play 5% more going home, and so it would take like a week to do like one stage on the commute, right? So it didn't feel as fun, right? Because you don't feel like you're achieving anything in that sense. I love the game, like I said, but actually I don't think it's a very good. It fits more like, for example, I was flying last year. I was flying like to Orlando, right, for whatever for work, and it was like a 14-hour flight, something like that. Now, then it was fine. Then it was fine. Then you can play Fire Emblem. I played Disgaea 7. You can play Disgaea or Fire Emblem, just like longer games, right? Because it's like, well, it's like 10-hour flight. Yeah, then it's fine. But I hope it's right. This is what the genre has exploded to in popularity because not the puzzle games like Candy Crush or whatever are not part of the genre at all, so I don't think that's the same thing. Some people argue that they are, but I would say for a second. But they of course share the same thing, that they're very short, right? You can play a match 3 game in like a minute, so they're very similar in that sense. But I think that's the key, but this genre is more popular now then, because they really fit for like this short, like 2 minutes there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes there. And like I said, compared to like Fire Emblem, even though it's turn-based, you can't really achieve that much, right? So you don't feel as fun, because you don't feel. So I think one thing also, but very small rewards, right? Also very common in genre. Very small rewards. You farm a little bit, little better sprinkler system. You build another city, a little more income, you know what I mean? These games are very common, that they have very small increment of success, right? Which brings to the next page here. And that is calm flow, right? What I'm describing to you guys is what I call calm flow. And thinking about that, right? You're constantly doing something, increment, right? You're constantly working on that farm. You're constantly improving your empire in Civ. You're constantly getting a little better house, right? Or whatever. You're working on the game, right? You're constantly improving, right? And that gives you constantly small feedback loops, right? If you think about this from a cognitive science load, this is why this is so good, right? Because it constantly gives you a little bit of that, oh yeah, it's pretty fun, it's slightly bitter thing. Stardew Valley, I keep saying it, that you farm a little bit, you get a little more iron, and now you can build that sprinkler. Little more sprinkler, get a little more money, now I can get another more plant. Little more money, I can buy another bag, I can buy another hammer, I can build it. Constantly smalling it, right? Gets you into that, one more turn gameplay flow, right? But at the same time, though, we had this thing called evolution or nurturing gameplay design pattern, which is basically that you constantly are slightly improving whatever you're doing now, your empire, your country, your farm, etc., right? Or your tycoons, your rollercoaster are bigger and bigger, more money, right? Or your slightly more employees, whatever, right? Constantly improving. But again, the key is that it's slight improvement all the time, and also then a flow of it, right? If you combine these two things, constant flowing, constantly hammering, getting slight increments, slightly improving your farm every step, right? You're slightly then nurturing it, right? That's why it's so addictive. That's why you get so addicted to this like one more turn thing, because it constantly is a very, very tiny feedback. However, it's also called flow, right? Because you get so submerged into it that it has no tension, and you kind of just flow through it with very rigid thing actually. So most of these games don't have what's called a discovery thing, right? Because it's very clear what you're doing, right? Yes, you have small discovery in Civ, you have small randomness, but it's sort of value. You hit a block, it's small randomness, but it's very, very clear flow, right? You go to the mine, get some more iron, improve your sprinklers. More sprinkling means more money, right? So these games need to have a very clear structure. Right? Even though Civ has like you randomly discovering terrain, so to speak, it's very, very clear, right? You go out in the world trying to find resources like iron, horses, gold, whatever, right? You build a new city at the goal and get more money. It's very, very clear, right? This game doesn't usually have bigger randomness, and they absolutely don't have stuff like compared to Elden Ring or whatever, where the boss suddenly is like fire breathing, and suddenly you die, right? Suddenly the boss goes into like a super whirl spin thing and do like 1 billion damage to you. You're like, no, that never happens in these games. Not only because you don't have what's called tension or pressure, right? But it's more how like if something bad happens to you in these games, it's usually not that punishing, right? If something bad happens to you, even in Civ, right, and also Uber Charlies, you can't lose that much usually in the games. It's very uncommon actually that your whole empire is taken down by the barbarians. It happens almost never, right? No, they might attack you. It's like one city. You might lose the game, but it's still like not that much to it, right? And like I said earlier too, I do think that Civ and those games are very into this topic, but they aren't the best example of it. They're more like the traditional example pottery. They aren't really the best version. The tycoon games are better, right? Tycoon games are like, oh, if you fail your roller coaster, you lose some money, but you can usually, still make it, the quest, the mission, if you have that one, they can still achieve it eventually. So, usually very low punishment, right? I think that's also a big difference, of course, right? When it comes to these, as I call them in my first video, tranquil games, the hardcore competitive games, right? Those games are also very, very like mentally high pressure because they have again high punishment. If you play a single player game, you die, right? You have to maybe replay the whole stage, or you lose your XP, like in the Souls game, you lose your levels, or right? So it's a high punishing. If you play PvP, like for example that Street Fighter or whatever on ELO, you play on actual ladder, right? You have it's called ladder anxiety. You play League of Legends and Dota, whatever. Right? If you lose a game, you fall down in rank. It feels very mental. It's very mentally. Some people hate it, right? You get very angry, get tilted, right? Get pissed off. So it's very punishing feeling, right? These games, these pottering games, these nurturing games, they basically almost never have any punishment to it either. That's a big reason from a mechanical standpoint why they don't cause that anxiety, right? Very meditating, very calming games, right? As a side note though, it brings me up because I said in another video that I had a CEO of the game company. He loved to play No Man's Sky. So every lunch break, he played No Man's Sky for like an hour. And he's actually expert on this topic because he actually wrote a paper about this topic with my mentor, my professor mentor, in grad school and PhD. He was probably with like 20 years ago. And small world, I bring it up here. People tend to ask me like, how to get a job in the game industry, and so on, right? And I want to bring it up here and say that, of course, the reason I got a job in the game industry isn't just pure like nept, whatever. I have skills, whatever. But I had worked in the game industry for like 5 or so years, okay? And I was applying as like lead game designer then at the company, right, with the guy that wrote this paper with my professor that I met him 5 years earlier at a conference. I applied for that job and got the job, right. And of course, when I talked to him in the interview, he was like, oh, of course I remember you. You're good friends with the professor guy. Your mentor. I know him, we're good friends. And he had read my paper. So this guy, my coming boss then, right, my future boss, had read one of my academic papers about psychologically when it comes to video games, he read it, right? Because I wrote it, the co-author being his old co-author, right? Small world in the game industry, right? So I must say that the only reason I got the job is the reason why. But obviously, he only read my paper because he knew my co-author, right? And then he liked our papers, he hired me as a lead game designer. So the world is very, very small, right? And I also want to say this thing here. I get it. I really hesitate many. I really get it. And I think that gamers, so to speak, are very hard on game developers when it comes to setting up, I guess, the vote or whatever, so on, right? Because like I said, the game is so tiny that a random dude, liked my paper, she liked this guy, and blah, blah, so on, right? The game is so incredibly tiny that everyone knows if you stand up and say, this is what I believe in, this thing, so on, right? You will get fired and never get a job again, right? Because everyone knows everyone, so everyone has to try to pretend to be like everyone, right? And obviously it's very like toxic positivity, but I think you have to understand that being a game developer, which is sort of incredibly tiny, few people in it, right? The pop is so tiny, it really does affect you immediately if you go outside, you know, whatever is the consensus, right? Anyway, I hope you guys see that coming from a little bit, because I course I agree that you have to be very open about it. So don't get me wrong, I am crazy. I have my whole life always been too honest to people. They got me in trouble all the time, right? Because I'm like, it's a dumb idea. I have always been the black sheep. And when I mean the black sheep, I mean the honest guy, being like, this is a terrible idea. But that's, honestly, it's so funny. So I want to derail the video here. But one more short life story here. I was working at a game company. Now, to be fair, I was the creative director, so I had a lot of input anyways, I had a lot of power, right? But I was very, very much against this PR idea that the COO had, which was terrible, okay? And I had to fight a lot for that to not happen, right? And it, you know, it feels like stupid ever. But every meeting I had with the CEO there, not another owner, right? He'd always be like, oh, it's so good, man. You're the only guy not being a yes man. I love you. He told me, like, I love you. You're the best employee. You're the only guy not being a yes man. You're a no man. We need more no man. I was like, yes, thank you. He was like only guy being like, the CEO loved it. He was like, yes, tell him that he's wrong. Yeah. See, it was like, yes, be even harsher against them. Yeah. So, I think unfortunately, a lot of people actually do agree with what's called common sense, right? In this case, even the CEO, the owner of the company, right, agrees with the common sense belief I had there. But, you know, it's harsh. And I saw that too in the company that, you know, the more I was outspoken, the more people would say, yeah, you know what, I agree, yeah. So at the same time, it only takes a few people to be like, this is wrong. These people will actually stand up. But it's harsh. It's hard for a lot of people to be the first guy doing it. But anyway, sorry for the side note, but these things remind me so much because my mentor has like a book about this thing and blah blah. It really reminds me of how I learned so much about this topic here. Now, we can talk about a lot of calm flow eventually, a lot for many hours here. But I think that generally speaking, right, the other things, they're not focused about like nurturing, evolving, so on, and the whole like concept, this immersive stuff is also of course crafting or maybe constructing, right? So for example, I mentioned like World of Warcraft, obviously famous game, and they have both blah blah so on, right? But you also have that in a lot of, I guess mostly role-playing games, especially Japanese role-playing games. They've always had, not all of them, but for example, Dragon Quest, some random stuff in my head there. It was called Rogue Galaxy, had a very good one, and so on. So it's very common to have like a complicated crafting system, right, in these games. Both because it's another part of like mini game that gives a challenge factor, right? But also because, think about it this way, right? A big reason why these role-playing games have complicated crafting mini games, we just have to do a lot of combining stuff and so on, right, is because it's quite nurturing, it's quite calming. So if you have a video game with a lot of combat, like bam, 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 fight, right, suddenly you get a lot of treasure from your boss fight, bam, 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 you get a save point, and here you can then do a mini game of like hammering your new sword or whatever, right? And it's very relaxing, it takes 10 minutes, but it's very nice, it's a cool mini game, it's very like, on pressure, right? That completely breaks you from the constant fighting maybe for the last hour. So it's a very good way to kind of like intermix that for the gamer, right? And also just have constant fighting. Otherwise, you might have fighting and then, of course, storyline like cutscenes ever. But if you're in a lone dungeon, right, you have like fighting, crafting, fighting. So crafting gives you that a little meditating, calm flow, right, for your brain, even inside an otherwise maybe even a hardcore like single player permadeath game, right? That crafting, or maybe it's generally character trees, right? Development trees, whatever you have for kind of system for your talent trees and so on. That also might give you a lot of like, calming you down, right? And I think that's a big part of a lot of role-playing games, the kind of system, right? We have a lot of focus on combat, then you have a lot of focus on tinkering, right? I mentioned how much I love Fire Emblem. One reason I like Fire Emblem, right? It's really fun in Fire Emblem and other games like Front Mission, Pettis Ogre Battle, you can Overlord here, right? It's really fun in those games to tinker, right? To sit there and construct and change items and builds and this thing and who should be in the same party and this character, she got flame guard, this got to flame, reflect this thing and then this thing and then that thing and then you fight with them, It's very nice, you can have that feeling of tinkering, crafting, construction, right? So there's many words here for this thing, usually it's called crafting then, but I guess tinkering is not all the word for it. But basically you sit there and fix your mechanics, right? And especially these like Robo Wars, for mission you have this building your mechas and has to put the weight and the weapons and this and what. It's a lot of fun in that, right? And like I said, it's like fighting this thing, right? Last year we had Armored Core, right? Constant action game, Souls-like, based on what it's also made by From Software. Constant fighting, explosions, very, very hardcore, very hard game. But then the crafting is very calming, it's very different, right? And I always been a big, I always really liked the idea of when you make games, you should have very different feels to them in different mini games or different side games, right? So of course your budget matters a lot, but I always felt that it's really nice to have like a crafting mini game, not just like hitting the hammer and it's not over. It should be a little bit like an interesting side gameplay. If you're having a platform game, I love all platform games, right? Where you suddenly you have to drive on a bike or on a motorcycle, you have to do this thing at the float on a rocket or whatever, right? I always like that when the game changed the gameplay, right? To some other kind of gameplay and so forth. But especially then if you go from like action focused to, calm crafting, right? So now we're changing the genre, now we're changing the gameplay experience, right? Maybe I'm overthinking here, but I think a lot about this stuff. This is my job, okay? I think about this way too much, but I think it's important. It's very important, and I, especially then if you have a video game where the storyline isn't that, focused, right? You have a video game where your storyline might be a big part of it, but like I said, maybe you have like 5-hour dungeon, then you get more cutscenes. Maybe it's like an hour cutscene afterwards. Typical JRPG, it's like 10-hour intro cutscenes, and it's like dungeons for 10 hours. But you get my point. That is really good having like a tinkering stuff. Oh, I can do this thing, so on. Like I'm playing, for example, Refatasia now, Metaphor. I was beating it. That game has some tinkering with the archetypes and parties and shit and stuff. But that game could have more, honestly. It could have more of that because the dungeons can be quite tedious in that game. It can be quite long. And I don't usually change my party members that much, honestly. Or the archetypes, the class basically. It's like if I start as a gunner, I probably will finish as a gunner. You know what I mean? Yeah. I change in between usually, I feel. And sometimes I change it, but more so late game where you have unlocked everything and you have a boss fight, then of course change it. But early game is kind of like, no, I'm playing a knight. I'm doing the knight the whole way through. most of it, yeah. Except the first dungeon where they countered your healer. I could have stopped the healer. But I think those sometimes could lack it, Like a game I love, and I mentioned earlier I like Fire Emblem, but a game that I really love, of course, Fire Emblem Three Houses. Oh my god. Opposite metaphor. The whole persona, right? The whole like romance thing in Fire Emblem with the tinkering. That game is so addictive, right? Because I'm playing it on mad. I mean, honestly, Fire Emblem Three Houses might be the perfect sample of this game, right? Because it has both serenity and tranquility, right? So it has the calm flow of the tinkering, all the different classes and characters and specking and grinding and dating everyone and romance everyone and how to build your team and this thing and that thing and fishing. There's so much of this stuff, right? It's a whole game that is super serene. On the same time, you play on maddening. The game is freaking hard, man. Like, you die so many times and do everything perfectly. It's super tedious. Every fight in the game is so hard. So it both has that like super hardcore calmness of being focused on a super hard fight right in the game for like 3 hours, and it has this incredible pottery. So maybe honestly, Fire Emblem House might be the perfect calm game, because Jesus Christ, it has both of these two things, because they're so different, honestly. Yeah, the in-house romance thing in that game and the fighting is like two completely different genres, a complete opposite of genre. Yeah, it's perfect. It's like fire and ice combined, man. I love Fire Emblem. But okay, so let's go over some of my favorite Serene games. Right? Now, obviously, I already mentioned how much I like Fire Emblem 3000, but well, whatever, it's on my list then, guys. Surprise! But like I said, right, Fire Emblem is a very good calmness of your mind game, because it has the serenity of the rapport, the farming, the fishing, the crafting, the tinkering is massive, right? Different classes, so on, all the romance. It's very, very calming. Half the game, right? From like a typical pottering standpoint. The other half, you play on maddening. Always play on maddening. It's incredibly hard. Everyone is dying. Items are breaking. Super complicated. Jesus Christ, man. So it has both tranquility calmness of hardcore gaming with, of course, serenity of crafting. Bam, perfect game, baby. Honestly, it is the best game probably to Switch. Seriously, I love the game so much. I also really liked Engage. Don't get me wrong, I have the kitties, both of them and other things. So I'm a big fan. But Engage has worse storytelling and worse characters. But the fights are actually better, I think. Engage actually has better, I think, level design for the actual like combat to some extent. But it has like weaker storytelling and so on. So it's a little bit worse game, but I still it's like a 9 out of 10 for me. And the Three Houses and the Switch game is like easily 11 out of 10, like the best game ever. But I think it is still the best Switch game probably published. I love it so much, man. But anyway, some other examples then, right, which I mentioned earlier in the video, when, Jens speaking here, is of course Civilization. Like I said though, Civs are the most classic, basically, one more turn thing. But it is a little bit like, has some tension, some anger. I think it is a big difference though, playing Civilization offline versus online, right? I have played a lot with my friends online, and then of course the wars are much more common when you're playing with real people, right? But if you play it offline, which I think like most people actually do with Civ, the majority, it is a very much a pottering thing, right? You're building a city and so on. I think the same thing with Europa Universalis, other like 4X strategy games, Stellaris and so on, right, etc. Crusader King, Horse of Iron, all those games from Paradox. They're very like, again, calming, but the same thing applies there, right? If you're playing the game on multiplayer online, it's a very different thing when you play with humans, because they're much more aggressive and they're more radical. And I also think that a general thing, an issue though, but it comes from the calmness cognition, right? Like in Civ then and EU and so on, is that humans tends to fight other humans, right? So it is kind of a weird thing to say, but it's a sad reality. But or I mean, not sad, but it's like in all these games, right, that are multiplayer and you can work together like a Civ. You don't have to fight. You can be, peaceful and go for the UN victory or whatever, right? But no matter what, right, in all of these games, yeah, if you play with other humans, they will usually attack you. You know what I mean? Humans tend to always want to beat other humans. It is, of course, from I don't know what to call it, but let's just call it what it is. I guess domination mindset. Humans like to, of course, dominate other humans rather than NPCs, rather than AI. So, and there is a lot of actual stats in that thing. So, for example, when you are training people, right, in simulations and so on, right, it is much better for them to not know if they're fighting real humans or not. Because sometimes in a simulation of battles, you can train against, AI or against you, or both. Usually it's both then. But if you tell them that it's all humans, it's all human, I'm gonna beat the crap out of those guys, Oh, it's AI, I guess I win. You know what I mean? So humans tend to have a tendency to be like, we have to defeat all the humans, right? So I think that also is a big reason why this game here, like Fire Emblem, is better add it, I would say, as like calmness effect, right? Because it's single player, of course. Because yeah, all these multiplayer games, I mean, you can of course ignore playing them online, right? But as soon as you go online on these games, yeah, all the humans tend to try to fight you because it's just kind of in human nature. Man, it's so dark when I'm saying that. Like, humans tend to kill all humans all the time, man. It's really dark when I'm like, humans are kind of evil. Yeah, it's kind of dark, but it is a massive reality. There's some other examples then, but it is a massive reality. It really is. Now, I mentioned this game before, but I do really love Rollercoaster Tycoon and other Tycoon games. But I have a really, really big sweet spot for Rollercoaster Tycoon games, and I think it's that. I mentioned earlier, right? But I think it is really because, like, it combines that Civ feel of, like, oh, I'm building my empire. Look at all my building, guys. Wow, look at my buildings, right? But, again, it has no tension, right? No one's fighting me. No one can ruin it for me. And I think Minecraft, of course, is kind of the modern version of this game, right? Let's be honest here. Minecraft's big success, and I should mention it earlier, but Minecraft obviously has a lot to do with this thing. It's also very meditating. You play the game, but it's why I bring it up now because, just like I said with Civ, right, and EU and so on, Minecraft is also a very different feeling when you're playing Minecraft, of course, on like I say it, your own server, no zombies kind of thing, right? Or you play it against with other humans and they're aggressive and they're angry and so on. So it clearly has a very different emotional feel, right? Depending on if you play multiplayer or not. But I think is that the reason I haven't brought up Minecraft earlier, even though you might say it's the perfect pottery game, so I don't actually think that. Some people say that, but no, I don't agree. I think Minecraft, from a crafting standpoint, is quite like that. But I don't really feel it is as much pottery and so on as other games. You can of course automate stuff in Minecraft, but I don't feel it is as focused on that. Minecraft is more like the building itself. With all the thing has a clear goal. So I think what I probably am lacking in Minecraft is the increment feedback, right? Minecraft doesn't have this thing where you constantly see, oh, immediately a bigger stuff, oh, immediately more income and so on. Minecraft, like you collect your resources, then you build this huge thing, but so there is like somewhat of a flow to it, and then you have a big feedback when you finish, right? With this game, or more like that, again, the tiny feedback, the flow feedback is constantly rewarding you every minute, right? I don't think Minecraft actually does that. I think Palworld, similarly, is a very similar, survival rift, whatever Minecraft game, right? I don't think Palworld either fixed that very well either, because you kind of don't have that much constant growth, right, in Palworld. As soon as you kind of out-level a little bit your monsters, like level plus 10 or whatever. In the beginning, it probably has more of that feeling, but... And also, what is about, I didn't like the game that much because I felt it kind of boring as soon as you got out of that increment flow increase, right? So, and I know, obviously, I haven't mentioned that exactly, but obviously, any game with like XP points, right, has, of course, an increment flow to it. Because another game I haven't mentioned yet is, of course, The Sims, right? The Sims are super good example of pottery crafting. You build your little NPCs, your home, right? You improve your home environment. And as I mentioned earlier, a big part of achieving this, like, serenity of calmness, right, is no tension, no pressure. Usually, if you can make a game be entertaining, but having used no pressure whatsoever, then you have this genre, right, so to speak. And obviously, the Sim, if you haven't played the game, have yet literally no pressure whatsoever. Right? It's kind of funny because basically, I mean, the player creates his world right for the Sims, but everything basically goes good for the Sims unless the player hurts them or something. It's not entirely true, I know, but it's like I have read a lot of papers, okay, seriously, about the Sims players, because this has been a very talked topic for many years, and Sim players are like 99% of like the Sims having a bad life, and the actual AI, right, is because the player is like drowning them in the pool or something. Yeah, it's always that thing happening. It's almost never that they actually have like a bad life because the player gave them this stuff and then they had a divorce or whatever. It might happen, but it's like, no, it's always the player's fault doing something to ruin their lives, right? But obviously, from a mental standpoint though, and I think this is actually quite important for actually more Sim players, is that Sim is kind of interesting in a sense, is that in most stuff that I read when it comes to sim research, is that the person, the player, right, the person behind, so to speak, controlling the sims, seems to not really relate to the sims in an actual emotional standpoint. So you have what's called empathy, right? Maybe not empathy. They might just like empathy, okay? But seriously, yes, kinda. So you have what's called empathy, and you have what's specifically called cognitive empathy, right? And if you have really high cognitive empathy, that means that it's easier for you to get emotional watching like a movie or reading a book or whatever, because you're feeling as you are the actual character. So I would personally, if I have myself here, I would personally say that I have very high cognitive empathy, because I cry really easily, and I'm having no bother saying that. I mean, I YouTube react, guys, okay, and I cry a lot to some stuff, right? I cry a lot to anime. I cried to video games. I cried to FF7, seeing to give air to flowers. I cried to a lot of stuff. Not so much Western video games, but I cried to some games that are made in the West. So I cry very easily. Why do I cry very easily? Well, it's because I very much feel like I am the character, right, when I'm watching it or playing the game. In a way, honestly, lack of better terms, most sim players seems to have very low cognitive empathy, because they don't care at all about the Sims. It is some kind of weird detachment to playing the Sims. The people that like playing the Sim games, they don't care at all about the Sims. They kind of have this like dollhouse idea that they're just there to be tortured or something. But you know, from a mental standpoint for the player though, it's good, right? Because that means that they have zero tension. You know what I mean? If the sim fails, right? If they have zero pain. If they play the sim game and your sim is failing, they don't seem to care. So, I remember the episode of Malcolm in the Middle, a great show. I love Malcolm in the Middle. Obviously, I am Malcolm, right? In the episode, he starts playing The Sims, right? And he basically makes an AI, like, per family member, and they're gonna act out like like we are in reality, to speak. And of course, his AI, the Malcolm AI, is terrible. Like he's like a drug addict, or whatever, and has a terrible life. Everyone has a great life, and he's like, no, yeah. He's to get home, being like, no, why is my AI, the Malcolm AI, is failing in life? You know, like that feeling obviously would give you incredibly just bad mental health from playing a game, right? Because he's playing a video game that he seems to be very much then cognitive empathy, like recognize himself as a character, right? But honestly, in most studies I read about the sim players, which have been a lot of them honestly in the past, not much anymore, but like 10 years ago, they seem to really not care about the character whatsoever. So yeah, they don't feel any sadness when the characters die. So I recommend it highly for your calmness. No, but it's kind of weird. It feels like perhaps it is gender specific. No one says that anymore. No, but seriously, I do think there's been a lot of studies how like children, boys versus girls, and how they play with the same toys in different ways, and how men look at their like, or boys that look at male toys or whatever. And it is probably honestly some reason behind that, because obviously The Sims is played mostly by women, so, and it has that more adult feel to it, right? So they recognize it probably, but I don't want to talk about the topic that I get cancelled probably. But that's not the video, guys. Anyway, let's go with more examples. Of course, I mentioned No Man's Sky earlier, right? But I do think that I don't just bring it up for like, okay, this is my old boss and he liked it a lot. But I think that he was generally speaking here. No Man's Sky, Skyrim, whatever, these kind of games, Obsidian running around in the open world, the sandbox games. Open sandbox games also tend to be very meditating and calming, and honestly, I think it's because they're very easy, right? And I am saying that people get tricks at saying that, but the thing is that when you're running around in this game or similar games, even games that kind of were popular, right, so to speak, but they tend to be like, yeah, you kind of walk around a bit. There's no really challenge to it. This is, you pick up your loot, you go to the next planet, right? Or you're traveling around the forest and you get to the next forest to fight some goblin and so on. But these games tend to be like overwhelmingly really easy when you're traveling, and some people that's really boring. And honestly, I don't like this game whatsoever. Even though I spent the whole video saying that how good it is for your health, right? I just don't like this game because, like I said earlier, I personally like to achieve this like calmness, so to speak, right? Through, of course, playing games like Stardew Valley or Severide or other games I mentioned with high level of tinkering, right? For example, another game is like Restless of Fate. You can tinker so much on your guns in that game. I can spend 5 hours just thinking on the gun. It's super fun, you know. Like, I rather do that, right? But I just never really like these games because I feel there's just no challenge to them and there's no end to them. You just kind of travel all the time and you kind of move around. But at the same time, they do fit the bill and some people really love them. I have to be honest here. I understand this is me trying to be academic here. This is me trying to be a grown up. Like, I agree. I disagree with your point, but I understand it. Yeah, this is me trying to be a grown up. I hate this game, seriously. Personally, I do. Yeah, I think they're incredibly boring. Even though you said like, I like this kind of pottering, but I think that these games are different in a different way, I suppose. It sounds like a terrible sentence. My point is that they obviously achieve high level of meditating, no pressure game standpoint, right? But constantly letting you use kind of open world exploring, and nothing really threatens you, right? I mentioned earlier how these games tend to have almost no punishment. If you fail a boss fight, you start immediately. Basically, you basically have no boss fights. But my point is like there's not really hardcore punishing there, right? But I just feel like I think the problem with these games, for me personally, and I recommend them still, if you just want to have a very, very calming effect, right? I think Skyrim and other games are very similar to this thing, right? Other sandbox games are very similar. But I think that the reason I personally like them is, as I mentioned earlier, Fire Emblem, right, has the perfect mix, in my opinion, of tranquility and serenity, right? These games here are pure serenity. And I wanted to have somewhat... I like it when the game is sweeping, right? When it's changing genre a little bit. The Stardew Valley is a little bit fighting sometimes, yeah. This game I feel is like you can just endlessly walk in a straight line, basically. I don't know. It sounds so negative now I'm recommending it. But I hope you understand what I'm talking about. So I'm recommending it, but I feel the recommendation is quite different here because, yes, these games are arguably the most serene games. They really are. They're very, I can say it, meditating, right? But I almost feel I have to put a little warning flag here because I feel like, yes, they're very, very serene. If you wanted pure, no pressure serenity, just walking in the world forever, just flying to the planet forever, then this is your game, right? I think that's probably what I'm saying here. What do you guys think? If you do, subscribe, slap it, and have a great day.